Hello and welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host Gordon Smith and I'm joined as usual by Jay Shabbat. In part 1 we're discussing United's latest earnings, and in part 2 we find out what brought together the CEOs of Air France-KLM and Lufthansa. Hi Jay, how's it going?
Okay, Gordon, are you enjoying a happy third quarter earnings season? I hope so.
I am indeed actually. As we discussed last week, the calendar gods are not always with us in terms of earnings, recording of the podcast, and everything else falling in between. And there are actually a few, I hate to say it, Jay, a few Friday earnings coming up, which is not great for our
Oh,
Airline Weekly issue. We work diligently through the weekend so it can land hot and ready on your in your inbox rather on Mondays. But yeah, we take it as it comes, and we enjoy it really. I think.
yeah, memo to all publicly traded airlines. Uh, Reporting earlier in the week is always better.
Or maybe they just don't want our scrutiny, Jay.
Yeah, they're trying to avoid our analysis. By yeah, something tells me they have other things to prioritize when they're doing their earnings call schedules. But if there's, you know, if it's all the same to them, if they have a choice between a Tuesday and a Friday, please choose Tuesday. Makes our
I
lives
like
easier.
I like to think we've got the year of a few C-suites on this podcast. So you heard it here. Tuesdays over Fridays would be appreciated.
Of
Okay,
course,
Jay.
there are worse ways to spend the weekend than listening to an earnings call, and I'm being sincere there.
I have been completely sincere, and there's far worse ways to spend the next 30 minutes. Delighted to have you with us, Jay, as usual. Let's talk United earnings because since we spoke last, we have had the results out of Chicago. They're obviously compared directly, indirectly to Delta, who goes the week earlier. Comparisons are somewhat inevitable. We're speaking here on October the 21st. We've yet to hear from American Southwest, Alaska. That all comes later in the week. But United, Jay, what do our listeners need to know?
Okay, so United, as we're talking on Tuesday, United went the week previous, and United posted a 9% operating margin. That's always, as always, excluding special items. So 9% operating margin for the calendar third quarter. That's July, August, and September. And that was everybody's always kind of comparing the two. That was between United and Delta. That was compared to 11% for Delta. So 11 versus 9. So United did a little bit worse, and we'll go into a few reasons why in a moment. Um, we, I should say from the get go, if you look at United and Delta's revenue trends, capacity trends, the transatlantic market, the Pacific markets all looked pretty similar. There was definitely some issues with demand in both of those routes. I think we talked about that in our previous podcast when we discussed Delta. There was some weakness on European routes related to some softness in bookings early in the quarter because of some economic uncertainty in the springtime booking period. But let's put that aside for a moment because where Delta and United really diverged most, I think, tellingly was in domestic markets. And let me give you a few numbers here. So Delta and United grew their capacity in ASM terms roughly equal on the domestic market. So United grew about 6%, Delta grew about 4%. So United a little bit more, but not too much difference there. But whereas Delta actually saw a 2% year over year unit revenue increase, United saw a 3% year over year unit revenue decrease. So that's a big difference. And you always have to be careful when you're comparing year over year numbers. It is possible that Delta's numbers were influenced by the CrowdStrike incident last year. You recall that some of their traffic was disrupted. So it could be that some of that 2% increase last year was just an improvement off of that disruption. Just take these numbers with a little bit of, caution. However, I think there's more to it than that. I think there's some real substantive differences here. And if I may, Gordon, I'd like to mention a couple of markets, say 3 in particular, that I wanna highlight where United might have run into a little bit of domestic trouble in the 3rd quarter. So, without further ado, I will start with Newark. So Newark is a big, huge hub for United, very big for transatlantic, but obviously a lot of domestic goes through there as well. And Newark did have some very severe operational issues. Most of those issues happened in the 2nd quarter, not the 3rd. In fact, most were resolved more or less by the end of the 2nd quarter, but bookings were still affected. There were people booking travel for, summertime travel during the 2nd quarter. So that definitely did affect Newark for United. I think that issue is now mostly in the rearview mirror.
Is that
The FA,
Jay?
yeah,
Sorry to interrupt, Jay. Is that people who have maybe got a choice of airports in the New York metro area who said, I can go from LaGuardia or Newark. Given the choice, actually, given everything that's going on there, I'll head up to Queens. Is it as simple as that, or is there a bit more to it?
yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, the New York metro area is a very competitive market. So, if this happened in Atlanta, people might not have any other place to go. But if it happens, yeah, if you're living in Manhattan and you need to fly somewhere domestically and Newark is experiencing a whole bunch of delays and cancellations, then absolutely you're more likely to say, let's go from LaGuardia instead, or let's go from JFK instead. So
Sure.
yes, it's New
Yeah.
York area is a very competitive market.
It is, and it's also, I wonder, just the media coverage of Newark as well. That was hitting mainstream outlets, and even if the actual on the ground delays and disruptions weren't quite as severe as they made out, the perception, and especially with social media as a bit of an echo chamber at times, the perception of what was happening at Newark or not happening at Newark, as the case may be, could have spooked some others as well.
Yeah, I think so. And New York, of course, being the biggest media market in the country, when bad things happen there, it tends to be magnified.
Indeed.
So yeah, that's the New York issue is definitely relevant here. Now, Newark, as I mentioned, should be okay going forward because the FAA did cap the number of flights that can operate from the airport, so things have calmed down somewhat. So I think that shouldn't be an issue going forward. Now, number two, I mentioned Newark. Chicago, I think, is also a big challenge for United at the moment. Now, Chicago is a very good market for United. They tend to not tend to, they are the market leader there. They tend to get a lot of the heavy business traffic, but American is really trying to win some of their traffic back. uh, American has had a hub in Chicago for many years, and they've always sort of played second fiddle to United, which isn't to say that they don't have some good roots and, don't have some good corporate contracts there, but it has been kind of a slog for them over the years. And after coming out of the pandemic, they cut a lot of Chicago capacity, but they're building that back up now and they're really trying to win back business in Chicago. And United in turn has responded with more capacity, a lot more capacity of their own. So if you look at year over year capacity during the 3rd quarter, both United and American were up by quite a lot. I mean, in percentage terms, you're talking about like up 15 to 20%, something like that. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but that's substantial. So I think that's another reason why United's domestic revenue might have been tainted somewhat. And then the third market that I'll highlight here is Washington. Remember, United has a hub at Dulles Airport, which is in Virginia, and that, of course, is subject to some of the um, spending reductions or budget reductions for government travel, for federal government travel right now. Now, I'm not so much talking about the government shutdown that's occurring as we speak. It's been going on a couple weeks. That is more of an issue for the 4th quarter. That didn't start in the 3rd quarter, but I'm more talking about some of the things that even airlines mentioned in the 2nd quarter, where there have been, just federal job cuts, federal air travel budget cuts, and things like that. So that might be hurting. I don't want to, shortchange the Washington market too much. I think there's a lot of, defense contractors that are doing very well in that market, and many of them happen to be headquartered near Dulles Airport. That tends to be uh, a big area for that. There's also tons of data center construction in that area. So there's, a lot of economic activity there. I don't want to make Washington out to seem like it's, the 1930s depression or anything,
Still
but
lots going for it.
yeah, it does. It does. So, but clearly, what's happening in the government is got to be affecting
Sure.
United's, let's say international flights and domestic flights out of Dulles, no doubt. I also did notice too, just looking at the schedules in Cirium, Dio, that Frontier, Allegiant, and Breeze have all increased their capacity from Dulles, and in some cases just entering for the first time. So that's another, and of course, most of that is going to be domestic. I mean, maybe even all of it is domestic. So that's another reason. So there are your three markets that I said I'd highlight. If I could add just maybe one fourth as a bonus, or as
Oh, I love it.
a,
I love who doesn't love a bonus, Jay? Go
yeah,
on.
you get a bonus today. It's your lucky day, Gordon.
Kick it in.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say Houston. They haven't really talked about Houston, and it's possible. I think the Houston economy is still holding up pretty well, as is the Texas economy in general. Is I think performing well. Houston, however, does still have a very big oil component to it, energy, oil, and that sector has been struggling because, of course, if you look at where oil prices have been, they've been way down, and so it tends to be. This was certainly true in the past, maybe a little bit less so as time goes by. I mean, the economy gets more diversified and whatnot, but in the past, when oil prices tend to be very high, United and let's say Houston air traffic in general tends to be very strong because there's just a lot of oil companies spending big time money traveling around the world and business class, and that you'd have to believe is not happening as much right now because of the depressed oil prices. Again, is that a big explanatory factor here of why United had a rough domestic unit revenue situation last quarter? Maybe, maybe not, but I just wanted to call that out. And then finally, I'll say this too: when we're talking about Delta, I think Delta is benefiting more from what's happening with Spirit, the big pull downs there. They have just a lot of more overlap with Spirit, going into and out of Florida, for example. And I think Delta also experienced more of a benefit from other airlines pulling capacity from key markets. And the obvious one there is Atlanta, not just Spirit pulling a lot of Atlanta capacity, but also Southwest. So United saw some of that. I mean, in Houston, for example, Spirit's capacity is way down. That's helped United. But that big Southwest pull down from Atlanta has got to be very, very helpful to our friends over at Delta.
Absolutely, and we'll keep an eye on the various capacity trends as we tend to do rather well on Airline Weekly, supported by our data sets from Serum DOJ. Thank you for that United uh, roundup, particularly looking at some of the domestic exposure elements there. Much more to come as earnings season progresses, both on the podcast and in the Airline Weekly issue. Part two, we're going to be discussing Europe, particularly Air France-KLM and the Lufthansa Group, and what has brought the two CEOs of those respective mega legacy groups to a joint interview with the French and German press as we're speaking here on Tuesday, just yesterday. We'll have more details on that in part two. But before that, a quick reminder: send any questions or comments that you might have for us to podcast@skift.com. That's podcast with an S at the end. And please don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening or watching. And if you are enjoying the show, please rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review so we can continue to spread the word about the Airline Weekly Lounge. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Hello and welcome back to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm Gordon Smith, joined as usual by co-host Jay Shabbat. Part one, we were discussing United Airlines and the latest earnings coming out of there. But coming out of there, that sounded a bit Australian, Jay. I should save that for the
No.
Qantas. I'll save that for the Qantas episode. No, we are now discussing Air France, KLM, and Lufthansa, specifically the respective groups, the parent companies for that, because we have had quite an interesting interview with Air France-KLM's Ben Smith and Lufthansa Group's Carsten Spohr. They sat down, what was apparently for the first time, to give a joint interview in the French L'Echo and the German FAZ. And really, Jay, if you've only got 10 seconds, the headline was Europe's biggest airlines are tired of playing by the rules that they allege tilt in favor of non European carriers. They are suggesting that they are being held to a much higher standard than, and they do name check some airlines in particular, those in Turkey and those in the Gulf region, who can serve Europe, but they can't necessarily be forced to abide by some of the European environmental levies and some of the other elements that Ben and Carsten need to. So, Jay, this was quite an interesting interview, and some of the language is a little sharper than we've heard before, but some of the broader points about a level playing field are fairly well versed. I actually heard those from the CEO of KLM just last year at the IATA conference about a level playing field, particularly with regard to Russian airspace when flying between China and Europe. But like I said, some of the language was a bit sharper, and it was quite interesting to see both Ben and Carsten take aim at Qatar in particular. The core message to European policymakers, as I saw it, was that the geopolitical balance of air connectivity and who gets to control it is at stake. The CEOs said Gulf and Turkish carriers, quote, have almost unrestricted access to Europe to sort of siphon away traffic that once flowed nonstop through Paris, Amsterdam, and Frankfurt and others. Spohr actually said that Europe's home markets were connected nonstop to more destinations in Southeast Asia 25 years ago than they are today. And that's, of course, despite the region being much more dynamic than it once was, and arguably a lot more business traffic going into Southeast Asia than there would have been a quarter century ago. But Ben Smith, he cited the Open Skies deal with Qatar as a specific example of what had gone wrong. He said here, quote, the demand for flights from Amsterdam to Doha is, quote, negligible at around 50,000 passengers a year, while the actual capacity is almost 10 times that. The quote here, Europe is giving away the European market to non-European airlines that offer no benefits to Europe and create no jobs. And Spohr here, he got a little bit spicy. He said, I quote, the EU has granted a Qatari airline with no relevant home market unrestricted access to all European markets, which is unprecedented in global aviation and significantly exacerbates the situation. He continued, longer flights via Gulf hubs are essentially subsidized by the EU. This contradicts everything Europe claims to stand for. And we should say at this relatively early junction, Jay, that we did contact Qatar Airways for comment, for a right to reply. They did not respond to that. But more broadly, Gulf carriers generally, in sort of in historical terms, they have said that they support compliance with EU safety and labor standards, and they are a net beneficiary to inbound tourism and offering consumers greater choice and fair competition. Jay, but what do you make as on the other side of the pond? The comments from Ben Smith and Carsten Spohr. Is this just two big executives a little bit angry that they're being outclassed by more nimble rivals, or is there something a bit more to it?
Just the fact that they sat down for this interview together, two enemies, two frenemies, let's call them, coming
Frenemies, yeah.
together. Yeah, well, we're coming together to give a joint interview signals. It's a clear signal that they are very concerned about this. They're seeing significant traffic deterioration, revenue deterioration from these Gulf carriers slash Turkish airlines taking market share from them. Clearly, if it wasn't if it wasn't an issue for them, then they wouldn't be doing this interview. So it's clearly, and just if you think about some of these growth markets into, let's say, India, for example, you'll have someone coming from, just making this up, but someone coming from Toronto going to Delhi. Those that passenger they might be flying nonstop. There are a few nonstops in that. Or let's not even use Delhi. Let's say some smaller Indian Hyderabad, for example, where there's no nonstops from Toronto, so you have to go through a hub. So
Sure.
you're going to go through Paris, are you going to go through Frankfurt, or are you going to go through Istanbul, Dubai, Doha? You can see where this is a very active market where Europe is, particularly these two European carriers, are concerned about losing traffic. And of course, we know this is nothing new. I mean, you can go back 15, 20 years ago and they were complaining about the same thing. It is interesting, though, that the US carriers don't complain about it as much. I think United, for one, it more or less made peace with Emirates and they do some, modest cooperation. Uh, there's Delta sometimes still says a thing or two, and then of course the one big outlier that will never say a bad word about Gulf carriers on the European side is of course.
IAG.
And why tell everybody why IAG is just so friendly to the Gulf carriers.
Well, IG aren't here to defend themselves, but trying to keep it an even footing here. It is a little surprise, really, that the IAG, that's Europe's other big legacy airline group, was absent from that sort of unusual display of cross boardroom unity. It's because Qatar Airways is the largest external holder in the parent company of British Airways, Iberia, and Aer Lingus. And you might also be thinking, well, IAG wouldn't get involved in what's a European discussion after Brexit. But like I just mentioned, Iberia, Aer Lingus, obviously Spain, and Ireland, both very much still in the European Union. So they have a huge exposure to Brussels and what goes on there in terms of the policymakers. So this would have been a natural fit for Luis Gallego to join in, you would think, but with the let's just say the sensitivities around the shareholding, it would make absolutely no sense. But I think, Joe, that absence sort of highlights a fault line among European legacy players. You've got Lufthansa and Air France-KLM wanting tighter control of market access when IAG's global partnerships rely on the very openness that they're criticizing. So yeah, that relationship has long complicated IAG's position on issues related to Gulf carrier competition, and joining a public campaign that singles out their own strategic partner would have been, I think, politically rather awkward and commercially self-defeating. So, no surprise that IAG was not in the mix there.
Is it a 25% shareholding for Qatar Airways and
It
IAG?
is
It's
indeed. Yep.
25, yeah, so they own a quarter of that whole airline group, so it's a big, it's not just a token stake by any means. Now in fairness, IAG is less reliant on that kind of, traffic I was just talking about, North America to India, for example. And they do certainly carry that, but it's they because of London in particular, it is just much more of a it's an airline that's much more dependent on what we call local traffic, so O&D traffic, people just going from point to point, not necessarily connecting or not connecting. And then if you think about Iberia, they don't have any interest in that. They're Latin America, Latin America, Latin America all day long. Even Aer Lingus in Dublin, that's not a major connecting hub into the Middle East or India or Africa or anything. So you could sort of it's more than just this shareholding fact that prevents or that not prevents but that uh, dissuades IAG from getting involved in this debate. But certainly that 25% stakeholding, makes you makes it clear why they wouldn't get involved. So we'll see. Will Lufthansa and Air France KLM get their way? Remember, I mean, they're going to play the nationalistic card, or maybe that's the wrong word. We're talking about the multi-nation European Union here, but of course they're going to say, yeah, the EU's getting uh, they're being treated unfairly here, and our economy's losing out because of this. And on the other hand, there's going to be a lot of stakeholders, non-airline stakeholders within the European Union, for example, tourism companies, airports, that are going to say, no, 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 wait a minute. We don't, sorry guys, we don't care who brings the traffic. We want the people to, come. We want Emirates to fly here. We want Turkish
Absolutely.
Airlines to fly here. And even if they're just connecting, I mean, obviously the tourism folks are not so concerned about people that are just connecting through airports, but the airports themselves want the traffic, and even obviously if yeah, Emirates maybe carrying more connecting traffic than they are local traffic, but of course if they start a flight to you know Nice or whatever, they're going to be flying a lot of locals too. So um, it's yeah, we'll see, who wins that battle of different stakeholders. Over
Yeah.
the years, they've haven't been successful, but we'll see.
And just for we don't touch on the consumer side of things too much, Jay, but using my experience as a UK based consumer or former UK
Yeah,
based
for sure.
consumer,
I know what you're
if
going to
you
say. Yeah,
if you look at Emirates, for example, or even Qatar Airways to a lesser degree, certainly not Etihad, but Turkish could be another good example. You're getting wide body comfort from your origin airports. I'm thinking Edinburgh has got Emirates, it's got Qatar, it's got
right.
Newcastle, relatively modest airport, usually just some regional connections there, but you've got Emirates going in with the 777. So you could get on board, especially if you're in the nicer seats, you could be in wide body comfort for 7 or 8 hours without having to mess around with a narrow body and that Euro business class nonsense when they just block out that middle seat. You can be really starting your journey in comfort from your home airport. And I think that is a very compelling consumer proposition. No need to faff around with a narrow body and then connect somewhere. Get on the road proper and start the journey in style. And I think just back to your earlier point on IAG, it is not really their game to fight with all that exposure to the transatlantic. I think that's a really, really fair point as well, Jay. Just
Yeah.
to bring it back
Y-
to of
I
interest
was just going to
briefly.
make one more point, Gordon,
On
if
you
I
go, Jay.
may. I
Yeah, sure.
apologize. I just, yeah, I was, well, your point was great about, yeah, these carriers, Turkish Gulf carriers bring more service, sometimes lower fares, often lower fares. The only other point I wanted to make in terms of we talked about stakeholders, don't forget about Airbus. I mean, when you're talking about the European Union, that's one of European Union's most important companies in terms of the jobs it provides, the export revenue it brings in. And Airbus is certainly not going to support any policies that prevent some of their best customers from expanding. The more open skies is great for a company like Airbus. The more that airlines can expand around the world, the more airplanes that they're going to buy. So that's one thing that Mr. Spore, what'd you call him, Spicy Spore? Spicy Spore, and I don't know if you have a nickname.
He sounds like the sixth Spice Girl, Jay.
um, that could work actually. I also do a, corporate video or something.
The Spice Girls are overdue a reunion. Maybe Victoria Beckham won't turn up. Maybe they can
Yeah,
get cast in as a late replacement.
you blast that through the Frankfurt airport. Right. I don't know if you have a nickname
There's a vision.
For Ben Smith, but the two of them may, may have. My point was they just may have a uphill battle because there's a lot of stakeholders that will be against them.
Yeah, I don't envy both gentlemen and all of the various teams. There are just so many factors to consider. Yeah, even I imagine having that joint interview. I imagine that was quite heavily planned and quite tightly choreographed around the speaking points and who they were going to annoy and who they weren't going to annoy, and not treading on toes. It's a really sensitive process. But
It's hard. It's hard too. I was gonna say it's hard too for, these airlines try to speak with one voice. I mean, for example, in the US, you have the A4A, Airlines for America. In Europe, you have is it European
A4E, yeah,
A4E? Excuse me,
Airlines for Europe. They have a good
Airlines for
summit
Europe.
every March.
Exactly. Yeah. So how do you speak with one voice if IAG has one policy and Lufthansa and Air France-KLM have another policy? So that complicates their efforts as well, that they can't really do much to their lobby group on this particular issue unless, maybe they can get away with it, but IAG is not going to be happy.
Yeah, lots more we could discuss from this interview. I just wanted to wrap up with one point on how Europe can create what either Smith or Spohr called global champions. I think it was Smith. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, they wrapped up with a sort of plea to the European Commission to rethink competition policy and speed up airline mergers. Spohr sort of made the case for consolidation, and he said that far from being anti-competitive, the only way that European airlines can build the scale needed to compete globally is consolidation. He said, quote, look at the US or China. Each has three major airlines that haven't grown purely organically, i.e. through M&A. And he actually took a bit of inspiration from the group's latest acquisition to drive the message home. He said, quote, if ITA in Italy hadn't been taken over and stabilized by Lufthansa, how much competition would there be between the US and Rome in future? Competition would mainly be between American mega airlines flying to Rome from their hubs. And Smith broadly echoed the point, arguing that Europe needs to allow, quote, global champions, it was Smith after all, to emerge if it wants to stay relevant on the global stage. So, yeah, global champions, Jay.
Global champions. Yep. It's everybody wants to be champion of the world, and but it's a competitive industry.
Hyper competitive, Jay. We will be joined on stage just next week at the Skift Global Forum East by Antonio Neves, the CEO of Etihad. I'm sure we'll be hearing some insights about how quickly that airline is growing. I think read somewhere it's 300 flights a day they've got coming out of Abu Dhabi now, so some huge growth there, and no doubt ruffling some feathers in certain European boardrooms, but that's one for another day. And looking more broadly, we've also got the Skift Aviation Forum. That's December 3rd in Fort Worth, Texas. We're putting together the agenda for that, live.skift.com for all the details. And if you are an Airline Weekly subscriber, you get a free in-person ticket to join us at the Skift Aviation Forum. Check out the Skift website for all those details there. Anything to add before we wrap up, Jay?
Only that by the time everybody's listening to this, they'll have probably already the numbers for Q3 numbers for American, Southwest, and does Alaska go Thursday or are they Wednesday? Do you remember off the top of your head, Gordon?
I think Alaska Friday.
Are they Friday? Okay, so you won't have that, but we are going to go live on Thursday, and that's the day that American Southwest go. It'll be very interesting to see how both of those airlines talk about the domestic market after given our conversation just now about what United saw. American, remember, is a considerably has considerably larger exposure to the domestic market than either United or Delta, and of course
Yes.
Southwest is almost exclusively domestic. So they'll really give a clear picture of what's going on. So look out for that. And there'll be some foreign airlines trickling in. I have one already. I don't know. They go. Maybe it's Delta's influence. Their joint venture partner Korean Air already reported a little bit early for an airline outside of the U.S., but they reported a 9% operating margin, which was down from 15% last year, same quarter. So
Okay.
still good, but not as good as last year.
All right. More detail in the Airline Weekly issue. If you want to know what's in the deepest parts of Jay's brain, then you need to pay for the subscription product. I'm afraid we only give away so much for free on the podcast. Thanks for all those additional insights, Jay. And a quick reminder of that email address again: podcast@skift.com with an S at the end. If you want to get in touch with any questions, emails, or suggestions. Thanks, Jay, for joining me, and thanks as always to our producers, Monica and Will. And wherever you are in the world, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now.
And now, please enjoy the tunes of this. Never mind. I was gonna make a spicy. Forget it. I was gonna make a spicy sport joke, and I stumbled. My tongue just stumbled over that. Would have been funny, but I lost opportunity.
Whether you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, please make sure to subscribe, rate us 5 stars, or leave us a positive review. This really helps us get the word out about the Airline Weekly Lounge, so we can continue to bring you this podcast every week, absolutely free of charge. And if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the Skift channel and hit the notification bell to find out whenever a new video drops.